Hello everybody, this is B. Harper from AdventureAmigos.com, and I'm just stopping by to make this little theme video. Now, this is completely impromptu. I have had no prior planning to this, so forgive me if at times I ramble. But since we are in the month of Halloween, of All Hallows Eve, I wanted to just perhaps confess something to you all. Because here's the thing, I never used to like horror movies. This is how bad I was. So you all remember in the second Alien film, when Lance Henriksen basically gets quartered, ripped in half by the Queen Alien with her tail. That part traumatized the hell out of me. And for the longest time I would never ever sit through a horror film. The fact that my parents constantly tortured me by showing me the video clip of Michael Jackson's Thriller, yeah, I wasn't exactly a big horror fan. I admit it, I was a wuss. I was a total wuss. And it wasn't until some time later that I basically hardened myself. And I did so by constantly rewatching Alien 3 and Predator. Now, of course, neither of those are like straight up horror films, but they have horror elements, and they are sort of violent enough to constitute of what you may see in like a slasher or something along those lines. But again, it's not necessarily the same thing, but don't worry, I'm getting to my point. So after I locked myself in my room for hours on end, watching those two movies, that's when I started to appreciate what it is to be scared. Sometime after that, my parents would go out regularly at night time to go to dinner or something, and I would sit at home and watch movies. And I remember one night, before I went to bed, when I shut off the television, like locked the doors, all that, I was looking outside my window, the window of my lounge room, and we had this great big sort of oasis of sorts, of trees and foliage and that sort of thing, and I used to stare at it. I looked at it for the longest time, like trying to sort of think of the most creepiest thing possible, and it got to that point of which I imagined I saw this horrific looking face staring back at me. And oh, I just got goosebumps just thinking about it, because when I did that, I got some sort of vicarious thrill out of it. It was something I hadn't done before. It was a sensation that I was not quite familiar with. Because it's one thing to watch a movie, but it's another thing to use your imagination, like for a prolonged amount of time, trying to conjure up the most scariest, amazing, inhuman thing you possibly can. Here's the thing, I can't really remember what this face I dreamt up, or rather thought up, truly looked like, but I just remember the sensation of like imagining this thing looking back at me through the window, and just the feeling that the glass was not going to protect me. It was a really interesting sensation, and it was something that I did quite a few times. Though as I got older, I started to become more immune to that. But with horror films, like the ones I'm referring to, is something along the lines of John Carpenter's Halloween. Every horror fan worth their salt has seen it, and it has its reputation for a very good reason. A lot of people who claim to have seen the film say it's a splatter, it's a slasher, that sort of thing, but it's quite the opposite. It leaves a lot to your imagination. And not just the fact that it doesn't show you the horrors, like the horrors that we take for granted these days in blood-soaked orgies of films, but it's just the power of suggestion. And that made me think back to those times in which I stared outside my window and just like tried to imagine all these beasts and scary things, like wanting to come inside and get me. And these days, it's difficult to come across legitimately terrifying films that don't necessarily resort to, excess. Some horror films, like, succeed wonderfully in showing us, like, a lot, such as The Thing, another John Carpenter movie. There's a couple of others. I'm trying to think of it now. I'm sorry, it's a little bit late. But you get what I mean. It's not the fact that I have a problem with excess, but in order for me to get that thrill, I need to sort of like try and find a balance within the film, or rather the film has to try and find a balance in itself in terms of what it gives the audience, and thus by extension what it gives you. You being you, or me, or your neighbour. Because the sensation of fear is very sort of subjective. In terms of other horror films that don't necessarily rely on, too much of the bloody stuff, The Exorcist. Okay, granted, there is that crucifix masturbation scene and the pea spray, but the part that got to me the most was when little Reagan was being subjected by all the scientific procedures, like monitoring her for seizures and that sort of thing, injecting her. Like, the sequence is done in very good taste, but just seeing little Linda Blair screaming and sort of writhing in discomfort while all these things are poking and prodding into her, I think that's another sort of reason why when we see a horror film, in some cases it directly affects us because we can sympathise on a more physical level. Say if you see a character blow up, like all sort of Monty Python sort of thing, you can't really sort of connect yourself to that. But when somebody gets a paper cut between their fingers, you go, ooh, it's instinctive. It's a relatable sense of sensation, for lack of a better word. So, to me, I think we need to be scared. Now, when I say that, I mean that we shouldn't live in constant fear of being killed, but the power of films, books, comics, television shows, when these things manage to sort of nail down at the very core what humans are scared of, it can work so incredibly well. So whenever I remember back to those days in which I could just look outside of a window and imagine the worst thing possible, it was quite a learning curve for me. Now, just like everything else, it was a gradual process, but for some reason I keep on thinking back to that time, to that very first incident that I decided to just, let my imagination run free. Run free, I should say. I'm sorry, tongue. So yeah, fear is incredibly subjective, and I do feel that all horror needs to be one way. As I said, like, you can have a particularly grotesque film but still manage to evoke a sensation of anxiety and dread, and just the sensation of like, oh, I don't want to see this. But and yet you can still sort of sit in your chair with your eyes glued to the screen because you cannot look away. It's like a train wreck when you think about it. I think the last film in recent years that actually got this sort of goosebump sensation out of me was last year's The Conjuring. Now, granted, it wasn't a perfect movie, let's face it. I mean, what film is perfect? But James Wan completely understood how a ghost story works, how humans can feel frightened. And he also did that by giving us characters we can connect to. Because if all the characters in The Conjuring were like one-dimensional, stupid idiots, I don't think the film would have been as effective. I mean, you still would have had all the ghastly goings on because of the demonic witch, but it's how the people reacted to the demon's presence that really sort of like kicks off the power of the movie. So in that regard, I feel that horror films always need to have that particular element. Maybe I'm pretentious in saying so, but a lot of the people I've spoken to tend to favour films that go that little extra mile in terms of the circumstances, the story, the character. I don't think you could ever make the perfect horror film, but you can try and you can mix and match like all these different elements because there are so many of them. That's one of the best parts of being a storyteller, is that you can pick and choose from any sort of circumstance you want, so long as you know how to carry it off. So long as you know that you are making a film for people and you're not insulting their intelligence. So yeah, that's my completely uncalled for, impromptu and highly organised talk. But I'm curious, like, what do you folks consider frightening? What was your first foray into sort of, you know, the sensation of, oh, I'm scared but I can't look away? Like, were you on a roller coaster or something? Were you watching a film? Any of these things. We all experience this sort of stuff in our own different way, and that fascinates me. Consider it like being the human condition, I suppose. I don't know. But yeah, so this has been B. Harper from AdventureAmigos.net, and please be sure to check out our new and improved website. It's looking fantastic. Our big head honcho Dave Maines spent about 14 hours straight or so working on the website, and if you ask me, it's wonderful. So please check us out, and I shall see you later. Bye.